questions, wondering about life. And today the theme is, why do I feel so alone? And I want to invite you to pull out your outline for today on the blue half sheet. And subtitle, Living with Loneliness. All of us suffer from loneliness at some time in our life, and probably usually multiple times in our lives. And yet God doesn't desire that for you. Certainly He wants you to not know the sting of loneliness, but oftentimes we do. Isn't it interesting? We live in a time when there is more ways to communicate than ever before. We've got telephones, we've got texting, we've got the internet, we've got Facebook, we've got tweeting, you name it, we've got it, right? And yet so many people are lonely in today's world. And that's not at all what God desires for us. In fact, He says in Genesis chapter 2, He says, "It is not good that man should be alone." God doesn't desire for us to be lonely. And God in fact wants us to be able to enjoy life and not feel like we're all alone, to be isolated and so forth. And yet God's people, even some of the more bolder faces and names of the Bible and so forth, knew loneliness and isolation and that kind of thing. King David was certainly one of those. And King David's isolation and loneliness was brought on in part, in one point in his life, because he had been anointed as the next king of Israel, but hadn't yet taken it because Saul was still king. And Saul was threatening his life and so forth. So he was in hiding, and at times he feels lonely. At other times, David in his life was lonely because of his sin in his life. And when he was confronted by Nathan, the prophet, about his sin in regards to Bathsheba and the two of them having a child, David is isolated and lonely. In fact, in Psalm 25, he writes, as he's speaking to God, "Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted." Loneliness is something that's pervasive. So how do we deal with loneliness in our lives? Well, the Scriptures, once again, give us insight. I want to invite you to turn with me to Paul's second letter to Timothy, the 4th chapter. I've listed this portion on your outline. It's on page 1775 in the Bibles that are in the pews. Page 1775. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 9 through 21. And that portion is the last we hear of Paul writing to a young Timothy. And Timothy was a young man who had grown up in the faith. His mother and grandmother were both Christians. And Timothy is a friend of Paul's as he grows up under his tutelage and so forth. And Paul is writing to Timothy. He's writing from prison in Rome. And Rome is the place where Paul is going to end up dying. And we don't know how long after he wrote this that Paul died. We don't know whether Timothy got a chance to see Paul again or not. But Paul's words to Timothy, and consequently to us, give us some insight on how to deal with loneliness. He's in prison. Probably one of the loneliest places on earth would be to be in prison, wouldn't it, huh? I'm glad to say I've never had to experience that, but there are many people who do. And so prison is certainly a challenging place for Paul, as it is for anybody who's in that. Well, what he writes is this, beginning in verse 9. It says, "Do your best," as he's writing to Timothy, "do your best to come to me quickly. For Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens also has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Tychicus to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak I left for Carpus at Troas, and my scrolls, especially the parchments. Alexander the metalworker did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done. You too should be on your guard against him, because he strongly opposed our message. At my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, that's his mother and grandmother, and the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus stayed in Corinth, and I left Trophimus sick in Miletus. Do your best to get here before winter. Ebulus greets you, and so do Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers and sisters. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you all. What does Paul do to get over the loneliness, or to get through the loneliness, I should say, to get through the loneliness? Well, the first thing he does is that he wants to surround himself with positive people. Positive people. You see, he names Demas, for instance, because he loved the world, he has deserted me. Okay, he said, I'm not having to be with Demas anymore. He talks about Alexander, the metal worker, and so forth, who did me a great deal of harm and that kind of thing. He talks about being deserted by his friends and so forth. So he's saying, I want you, Timothy, and Mark, because you're going to be positive. You're helpful to me in my work, he says. It's interesting because his relationship with Mark had been a rocky one at the start. Mark was Barnabas's nephew, and he went with Paul and Barnabas on their first missionary journey, and Mark ended up deserting Paul and Barnabas on that trip to go back to Jerusalem. And so there was a time when Paul did not care for Mark. But they must have worked that out in some way, because now he's asking for him, and he says of him, he's helpful to me in my ministry. So he's wanting to be surrounded by people who are helpful to him. And people who are positive are people who are helpful, right? People who are negative are not very helpful typically. Okay? So what Paul is saying is, and something that we need to do if we're feeling lonely, is to surround ourselves with positive people. Quite frankly, that's one reason why I became a pastor. I want to be around positive people. I think of the church being a positive place and with positive people. And when I was asked why I wanted to get into the ministry, I said, I enjoy being with people. And that's true. Now, sometimes I ask somebody the question, how are you doing? And you don't always get a positive answer, huh? You get a long litany of things and so forth. They actually teach you in seminary, never ask that question, because unless you really want to know. And but we all like to be around positive people, because they're people who uplift us and who we can uplift as well too. You see, because loneliness is to be in need of human interaction. There's a lot of lonely people out there. And that's different than solitude. Solitude is something that's very different. That's something important. Solitude is to be alone to increase quality of time with God. You see, loneliness is not about that at all. It's needing human interaction. See, I believe one of the purposes of God's church is to provide friendship and encouragement to other believers. Other people who are trying to draw closer to God. And that's what we come together for. And that happens best, not necessarily in a big group like this, okay, although we hope it happens here, but that it also happens in small groups, so forth. That's critically important, because when one member is sick, the others know about it and they reach out to him, you see. Or one has a struggle of some kind, they reach out. Because God is saying to us that it's important to reach out to the people around us. It's interesting, Carl Menninger, the great psychiatrist, in talking about loneliness and depression and so forth, wrote, "Lock the door behind you, go across the street, find someone who is hurting, and help them." What I always say to somebody when they come in to see me and they're suffering from depression is this: hey, what are you doing for somebody else? Because when you see somebody else who's less fortunate than you are, it makes your situation not quite so bad, and it gets your mind off yourself. Critically important. Critically important. So the first thing that Paul did was he wanted to surround himself with positive people. He also wanted to take care of himself physically. How do we know that? Well, look in verse 13, the first half of it. He says, "When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas." He's talking about his physical needs, isn't he, huh? Bring that cloak, all right? One of the things that is a joy is that when I go out to see folks at the hospital or a nursing home, oftentimes they will have with them people who are a part of our congregation or have been here for a while. They will have what some ladies have made, and we call a prayer shawl. A prayer shawl. And oftentimes when I've met with people, either in the hospital or a nursing home, they've said, "Oh, I really like this prayer shawl because it reminds me of my church family." And that's critically important. You see, it's an extension of us. To have that kind of physical presence isn't always able to do it, but with something like that, it reminds them of the physical presence. You see? Just the other day, I was talking with somebody in my office, and they were expressing some family concerns and so forth, and they shared with me a conversation. They shared with me that they are so happy because they're going through some challenging times right now, but they're encouraged because they've just started to get back into working out again, going to somebody and working out. And I said, "Well, that's great," and they were excited about that. That they had another family member who wasn't doing any of that, and they were concerned about this family member for their health. And they said to their family member, because the family member put up the reason why they weren't taking care of themselves really the way they should, eating right, going to the gym, that kind of thing, was that they were so busy. And this person who was speaking to me said, I told my other family member that, you know what, it's going to be hard to find the time. You've got to make the time. And that is so true. You've got to make the time. And so something like the prayer shawls is important. Sarah's Kitchen, for instance, a ministry that St. Andrew has been behind right from the very beginning, is a ministry that not only just feeds people, but is trying to encourage people to eat in healthy ways. They now have a nutritional program as a part of it. It's not just put something in front of somebody. No, it's saying, you know what, there are good things to eat out there that are not overly expensive, and helping people to learn about those kind of things, you see. And that's critically important. The seniors program is a critically important program here at St. Andrew because we have about 25 to 35 people who come to that regularly who find that to be their family, you see. And when they're with those folks, that's terrific. John Gold and I just spent 3 days with Alzheimer's community care people. We went up to Tallahassee and spoke to many of the legislators up there about continuing to fund things like Alzheimer's daycare that we're going to be having soon here at St. Andrew. And one of the things that we found out that was new, I think, or at least reminded me, and I think it was new for John, was the understanding that, Alzheimer's community care, for instance, is not just for the person who has the Alzheimer's. It's just as much for the person who's the caregiver. Because sometimes, I forget what the percentage was, I think it was something like 63% of caregivers die before the Alzheimer's patient dies. Because they oftentimes don't take care of themselves and their own physical needs. They don't go and get the exercise. They don't interact socially with others. They don't do those things because they're so consumed with this. See, we need to take care of ourselves. Well, right here at St. Andrew, we've been blessed with a program that started here almost 6 weeks ago now, and called the Daniel Plan. And you've probably heard about it, but I don't know how much you know about it. And I've invited Darlene Dawson. Darlene's leading the group this time, and to share about it. Darlene's also our Director of Christian Education here at St. Andrew. And Darlene, would you share with these folks a little bit about what the Daniel Plan's all about? I know Darlene's excited about it. So.
I will. Good morning. Thank you, Pastor. You've probably heard about the Daniel Plan in some way. It's the Daniel Plan, 40 Days to Healthier Life. This is written by Pastor Rick Warren. Many of you know Pastor Warren and the great works that he does. It's also co-authored by Dr. Daniel Min and Dr. Mark Hyman. And when we started this program, the Lord has a way of sometimes telling us things to do, and we kind of like, okay, when I get around to it or when I have time. And when I looked at this, and I shared with Pastor Dave that I would like to possibly get a small group, because that is part of my ministerial program here, I thought, well, who could I get to lead this? And it kept coming back, and the Lord kept knocking on my door saying, well, now, Darlene, let's be honest. If you attend this class, you may or may not do it. But if you teach this class, then you'll have to do it. And so, taking his words, I made the decision I would teach this class. Well, it's not really a class. It's an outreach to each other to belong to a community. There's this misconception about the Daniel Plan that you're to lose weight in 40 days. Well, that's a piece of it. But there's 5 major components that are important. And it starts off with our faith, and then the food, and then the fitness, and then focus, and it ends with friends. And the key component here is friends. I'd like to share a few readings with you, if you would, please. All of us want to enjoy a healthier life, being healthy, being at our best, not only emotionally, but spiritually and physically. The Daniel Plan offers this in a very simple way, and it helps us to become healthier. Improving our health is possible, but doing so requires a great deal of effort and changes in our daily lives. When we choose to spend time with God, or to exercise, or to eat healthy food, or to focus our thoughts, we take steps forward in our goals in our everyday life. This is hard, especially when we have existing habits that haven't led us to be healthier. And it's even tougher to be doing this alone. So many times when we're faced with issues in our lives, we choose to do it alone. If we're smoking and we want to quit, if we're overweight and want to lose weight, if we're having struggles with our emotions or our physical beings or maybe our faith, we tend to think, well, if we do this by ourselves, then nobody else will know about it. I might mention it to Pastor, but he's busy, so I'll just talk to God and I'll do this all by myself. We all do that in our everyday lives with all the things that come up in our life. And yet God tells us we are not meant to do this by ourselves. And I think that's why we have churches and why we have small groups within the church. Being connected and doing things together only helps build who we are and what we're to do. Being engaged in a community will improve your health, and not just physically. Friends can improve you emotionally and spiritually. The opposite is also true. Isolation injures us. Our lack of community can keep us from being the healthiest that we can be. One of the reasons the Daniel Plan has been so successful is that it's helped to succeed in providing a healthier life through the mechanism of a community. I'd like you to look to the person to your left. Go ahead, it's all right. and look to the person to your left or your right, the other left, or the person behind you or up here. Because these people, all of us together, make up a community that can stand together and help us through anything that we face in life, even death. Much of what we do, much of the things that ails us is preventable, is treatable, and often curable. But we need to have the help of our family and our friends and our congregation members to help us through. You've read for many years about doctors who don't always talk about having God in their lives to cure people. We hear that often. There's a Dr. Paul Farmer who has been successfully treating tuberculosis and AIDS in foreign countries like Peru and Haiti and Rwanda. And he said, I kept pouring thousands of dollars of medicine into these programs, and I kept helping people buy more water and medicines and all these things, and yet people weren't getting better. And he became perplexed by that, and then it finally dawned on him that what the piece that was missing in that was people helping people, that they form a community to help each other through those difficult times. So the medicine wasn't just the pill you might take or the liquid form you might drink, but it's also about the love. That the love that we have for each other and the sharing of what we deal with day to day is what gets us through all kinds of things, whether it be with your friendship or your focus or your fitness or your food or your fellowship. Dr. Dean Ornish was the doctor who helped us and came out about, probably 30 years ago and says, if you do these 4 things, we'll reverse your heart disease. If you exercise regularly, if you eat a plant-based diet, if you reduce your stress and quit smoking. And so he thought by sharing those 4 simple things, people would reverse their heart issues. He became very frustrated and very perplexed because it wasn't working. So many people were not just trying to do those 4 things. And what he found out was that all the medicines in the world could be focusing on those 4 things, and yet it wasn't being accomplished. That it was indeed love and the respect and the sharing and the support of each other to get them through. Love and intimacy are the root of what makes us sick and what makes us well, what causes sadness and what brings us unhappiness and happiness, what makes us suffer and what leads us to healing. I'd like to share a little bit about the Daniel Plan in this. When Pastor Rick Warren started this at his church, the Saddleback Church, a mere 15,000 people came on board. I thought about that, Pastor, and I thought, whoa, they'd have to pay me more money for 15,000 people. But 15,000 people jumped on board and got into small groups and shared this plan. And from those 15,000, it's grown into thousands and hundreds of thousands. Well, we started off small here in St. Andrew. We started off with 25. I was pleased. I was surprised, but I was thrilled. We've lost 2 ladies due to some illness. One fell and broke her hip and can't be with us, but she made the comment to her best friend, well, if Darlene's going to do this after Easter, I'm coming back. We range in age from 14 to 87. We have some complete strangers that came the first night and have been coming every night. We meet every Wednesday. As Pastor alluded to, this is our last week. So as I talked to the group last Wednesday, I said, this is our last week and we want to do something special. We decided we're going to do a salad bar. Everybody's bringing something and we're going to have a nice big salad bar. Salad bar, just saying, salad bar. So we're going to have a nice big salad bar as we go through our last evening. And then somebody said, but wait a minute, we don't want this to be our last evening. We want to continue. We want to continue to meet and grow and be together and support each other and help each other, not only through our successes, which we share each week, but also our setbacks. And isn't that true in life? We have successes and we have setbacks. And by the grace of God and the love that He has shown us, He brought these 25 men and women together. And we, by the way, of those 23 that we have, 4 are young people, are youth in this congregation. And they don't need to lose weight. So you see, it wasn't about the weight for them. It was about all the other components. I'd like to share briefly about the point of love, because I can't stress that enough. When we get together, we talk about the successes, we talk about other things. We may talk about things we didn't do too well, like last Sunday watching the Super Bowl, and I raised my hand because that was a major setback for me, and I admitted it, and a few others did too. But through God's love, we are able to share these thoughts and these feelings. We talked about also, we share about things going on in our personal life, and I will share with this group. One of the ladies was talking about how she misses her deceased husband. Now, that really wasn't in the script, wasn't what we had been planning to talk about, but she felt the need to discuss that, to say, he's been gone a number of years and I really miss him. And we shared and we talked and we celebrated his life and we celebrated their life together, but we celebrated the time that we could spend talking about being friends and listening to each other. And that's so critical. I'd like to share 4 things in conclusion. Every group is unique. We support each other by these 4 things. You can tell I haven't taught for a while. I went like this. 4 things. We love one another. We treat each other with humbleness, with patience, and no matter what the journey, we're there to help each other. 2, we listen to each other. Listening is a unique thing. Our young people today haven't quite gotten that. Hopefully they will. But we listen to our struggles and our weaknesses, our progress, our successes, and we're there to help each other through their journeys. 3, we learn from each other. We share what works and what doesn't. We share what we did and we didn't do during the week, and so we can build on that and empower ourselves to be healthier. And 4, we liberate each other by showing grace to one another. The word grace is such a beautiful word. So we're there to show support and encouragement as we take our daily steps in our plan. I'd like to end with these words. And I first of all would like to say, I will be teaching this class again after Easter in the evening and also during the daytime, because I've had several people say, I don't drive at night, would you be willing to have it during the day? And I will. I don't know what days, and we're not signing up yet, but I would encourage you to join us. I would encourage you, regardless of age, regardless of your issues, regardless of what you're dealing with, there's somebody out there that you need to meet and talk to and be with in this small group. I encourage you to join us as a leader. We are always looking for more leaders. But as with the church, the Daniel Plan does the following. It deepens your relationship with God and develops a community of support of friends and family who will encourage you to make healthier choices each and every day of your life. Thank you.
Darlene, just a second here. I'm really proud of Darlene and her leadership on this and taking the step and sharing with all of you. And one of the things that Darlene recently did, as well as Mary Lou Carbonneau, who is our church secretary, she just celebrated her 80th birthday yesterday. Mary Lou did, but they both joined a gym.
I didn't 80. I'm not 80 yet.
No, not you. No, Mary Lou. And sorry about that.
That's all right.
And I thought, that's a great statement
We
to
did.
do that. And to do that together and to go and do those things together is terrific. And that is so important.
It is, and Pastor had asked me earlier, about this, and I said, I didn't have time. I made that excuse. And we can always use that as our excuse. But now we do it, and we have a great time. We celebrate each other and our time. And we don't talk about you much of the time either. So.
Good. That'll relieve you right there.
Right away. Focus changed.
Thank you, Darlene, for sharing this morning. Yeah, you can give her a round of applause. Yeah, to do that physically and socially are incredibly important. I also, it's important to note that Paul put in there in verse 13, again, bring the scrolls as well, especially the parchments. I would ask you the question, what are you reading these days? What are you reading? I think it's important that we be reading things, expanding our understanding about what life's all about, what other people have experienced, that kind of thing. That's an important question to ask. I just want to say to you that the cross, the most ancient of all Christian symbols, is made up of two lines. One that is foundational is the vertical, the post. And it talks about our relationship with God. And that's critically important. But so are the arms of the cross, critically important from the standpoint that we relate to one another as well, too. God can help us not to know loneliness in our lives. I'll share with my wife, probably her closest friends in the last 5 years, as she has been here in the Treasure Coast since she moved up here when we got married and so forth, have been her running friends. And because she talks with those gals weekly about what's going on in their lives and so forth. And some of those gals have real challenges in their lives, big challenges. And Kathy is a sounding board for that, and somebody who prays for them as well, too. I think about my mom. My mom, 18 months ago, lost my dad after 60-some years of marriage. And my mom, I know, goes through lonely days. I'm sure, as any widow or widower does. Absolutely. But God bless her, man. One of the first weeks of the Daniel plan, she came, I went and picked her up, and she walked in with her walker, for Pete's sake. You know? There's a will, there's a way. It's important. And she continues to not be lonely by her friendships here at church, her friendships in her small group, her friendships with people in the shrine that she and my dad are good friends with. And those things help. And each one of us have those kind of people around us. God doesn't want anybody to be lonely. But we have to open up ourselves, avail ourselves to the people around us. And God will bless us when we do that. In Jesus' name, amen.